The gunshot rang out at precisely 11:45 a.m., the sound echoing across the quiet suburban town of Maple Creek, shattering the peaceful atmosphere of April 1st. The crisp morning air, once filled with laughter and anticipation for pranks, froze in terror. People stared in disbelief as they watched a man fall to the ground, blood staining the sidewalk under his body. The victim, Steve Harrison, hadn't been shot during a robbery or a random act of violence. No, this had been a prank, but the gunshot was no joke. It was the kind of April Fool's prank that went horribly wrong. Steve Harrison had been the kind of guy who lived for chaos, the one who challenged his friends with the most ridiculous dares and gags, always hoping to outdo the last prank. But that morning, his prank was different. It wasn't about silly costumes or fake spiders and lunchboxes. No, Steve had planned the ultimate stunt, a robbery staged at the local convenience store owned by the town's most respected businessman, Roger Miller. It was supposed to be harmless, a mock robbery involving Steve's friends, fake guns, and plenty of laughs. They'd rehearsed it for days. Steve, dressed as a thug, would storm into Miller's store, threaten him with an unloaded gun, and demand cash. The shopkeeper would pretend to fight back. The police would be called, and in the end, they would all laugh at how the town had fallen for the prank. But someone had forgotten to tell one crucial person. Not everyone knew it was a joke. As Steve entered Miller's store, gun in hand, his friends hid behind the shelves, their cameras ready to capture the moment. Steve's heart raced with excitement. This was going to be legendary. Roger Miller, the tight-lipped businessman, would be the perfect target for his prank. The small town had seen enough boring April Fool's jokes, and Steve's plan was meant to shake things up. But when Steve pointed the gun at Miller, something snapped. Miller's eyes widened with fear, not the pretend kind, but genuine terror. The man, usually calm and composed, wasn't playing along. He froze, and before Steve could say anything, Miller lunged at him, knocking the gun from his hand. A struggle ensued. In the heat of the moment, a shot rang out. Steve crumpled to the floor, the fake gun now replaced by a real one in Miller's hand. It was only then, as the blood spread across the cold tile floor, that the horrified onlookers realized this wasn't part of the prank. Detective Laura Sanchez was having breakfast when the call came in, a shooting at Miller's store. It seemed like just another routine job until she arrived at the scene. The sight of Steve Harrison lying lifeless in a pool of blood sent a chill through her. It didn't make sense. Steve had been a prankster, yes, but a harmless one. Everyone in town knew him as the guy who'd dye his hair pink for no reason, or sneak a whoopee cushion under the mayor's chair. He was always laughing, always scheming. But now there he was, dead. Laura squatted beside the body, her eyes scanning the crime scene. She couldn't help but notice how neatly the prank had been set up. The store had been emptied out, as if it had been rehearsed for hours. The gunshot, too clean, no sign of struggle, no indication that it had been a real fight. The victim's face remained frozen in shock, the kind of expression someone might have when they realize the joke is no longer funny. Laura's gut twisted as she stood. This wasn't just a prank gone wrong. Someone had planned this. Someone had turned Steve's joke into a tragedy. Hours later, Laura gathered the friends who had been part of the prank. They were in disbelief, their faces pale and shaken. Jenny, Steve's ex-girlfriend, sat in the corner, her hands trembling as she stared at the ground. "I swear, Detective, it was supposed to be a joke," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We never meant for it to go this far. Steve just wanted to mess with Roger." Laura turned her attention to the rest of the group. There was Carl, the quiet one, who hadn't said a word since the moment he arrived at the station. And then there was Brandon, the one who had helped organize the prank. He seemed too eager to defend himself, his nervous energy only heightening Laura's suspicions. The story they all told was the same. It was meant to be a harmless joke, a staged robbery to get a laugh. But no one had expected Miller to react the way he did. Miller had killed Steve, they all said, but why? It didn't make sense. The investigation seemed straightforward at first, until Laura uncovered something odd. Jenny had mentioned, almost casually, that Steve and Roger had a history, one that went back to the time before Jenny and Steve had broken up. There had been a rivalry between them, some unresolved tension. Laura dug deeper, uncovering a pattern of deceit that had been buried beneath the surface of their small-town pranks. Was Steve's death really an accident, or had Roger been planning something all along? The deeper Laura looked, the darker the picture became. Steve's seemingly innocent prank may have been the catalyst for something far more sinister. As the day turned into night, and the small town of Maple Creek held its breath, Laura stood by the window of her office, staring out at the lights twinkling in the distance. In the midst of the investigation, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if this prank was never meant to be a joke? The truth was out there, hidden behind the guise of April Fool's Day. And with every twist of the case, it became clear the real joke was on the mall. Detective Laura Sanchez stood outside Miller's Convenience, staring at the yellow police tape that cordoned off the scene of the crime. The small-town shop, usually a place of comfort and routine, had transformed into the epicenter of a nightmare. The sound of sirens still echoed in her ears as she approached the front door, feeling the weight of the day's tragic events settle over her like a cloud. Steve Harrison's body had already been removed, but the aftermath still lingered in the air, unsettling heavy. The store's interior was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Laura's eyes skimmed over the counter, the shelves, the space where Steve had fallen. It was hard to reconcile the scene before her with the joyful town she knew. A town where pranks were supposed to be harmless fun, where the community took pride in their annual April Fool's Day tricks. But the prank gone wrong had left behind a bitter taste, one Laura couldn't shake off. Detective Sanchez. Officer Daniels greeted her, his voice tight. He was standing near the counter, his brow furrowed as he stared at the scene. "What do we have?" Laura asked, crossing her arms. Her eyes flickered over to the bloodstains on the floor. The body's been removed. It's still a bit too early to make definitive statements, but the whole thing doesn't sit right. We've talked to some witnesses, and everyone says the same thing. The prank was supposed to be a joke. No one expected anyone to get hurt. Laura nodded, already piecing together the conflicting stories. There was something off about the way things had played out, but the chaos of April Fool's Day made it difficult to trust anyone's version of events. Who's in charge of the witness statements? Daniels motioned toward the back room, where the group of pranksters was gathered. They're all in there. A few of them are still shaken up, but they're all sticking to the same story. That Steve was supposed to play the robber, and Roger Miller was the target of the prank. "Where's Miller now?" Laura asked, her eyes narrowing. "He's in the interrogation room. He's been cooperative, but his story doesn't add up. It's like he's holding something back." Laura's instincts pricked at her. She'd seen it 1,000 times before, the way a suspect could act one way and say another. Something about Roger Miller's demeanor struck her as wrong. He was too calm, too composed, given the situation. The group of pranksters sat in silence as Laura entered the small interrogation room. Jenny was sitting with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pale. Carl sat next to her, eyes darting nervously between the detective and his friends. Then there was Brandon, Steve's closest friend, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The air was thick with tension. "Detective," Jenny spoke first, her voice hoarse. "I swear it was just a joke. None of us ever expected Steve to get hurt. We just wanted to scare Roger, not kill him." Laura studied them for a moment, noting the tears welling in Jenny's eyes. She had known Jenny for years. She was the type to cry at a puppy commercial, not commit murder. But something was off in her tone, and the way she spoke about Steve's death, as though she were trying too hard to convince herself as much as the detective. "Tell me exactly what happened," Laura said, her voice steady, but her mind racing. Brandon, the most animated of the group, spoke up. "We all knew it was going to be funny, Detective. Steve was going to play the robber, but he'd only threaten Roger with a toy gun. Roger would fight him off, we'd laugh, and then we'd all go get lunch. Simple. Except for the gun," Carl muttered, his eyes flitting nervously to the others. "There was a real gun, and none of us knew about it." Jenny's face twisted in confusion. "What? No. The gun was part of the prank, too. We'd planned the whole thing. Roger didn't know it, but we—" "Stop," Laura interrupted. "We need to get this straight. One of you is lying." There was a real gun, and Roger used it. If you don't start telling the truth, we'll have to figure this out the hard way." The room fell silent as Laura's words hung in the air. She could feel the walls closing in on them. One of them had to know something more than they were letting on. Carl broke the silence. "Jenny's right, but the whole thing changed when Roger didn't go along with the joke. Steve was supposed to scare him, but Roger wasn't scared. He lunged at Steve when Steve pointed the gun at him, and then everything happened too fast." Jenny's eyes went wide with realization. "Oh God, we didn't think he'd do that. We didn't think Roger would really attack him." Laura's mind was spinning. Something was wrong with their version of events. Roger Miller, the man who had built his success on controlling every aspect of his life, couldn't have been caught off guard like this. The way they were describing it, it didn't add up. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with Jenny's. "You're hiding something. Tell me everything." Meanwhile, in the interrogation room with Roger Miller, Detective Sanchez was finding him more composed than she expected. His eyes met hers with an unsettling calmness, like a man who had already rehearsed his answers 1,000 times. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," Roger said, his voice steady, almost too steady. "When Steve came in with that gun, I thought it was a joke at first. I thought he was just messing around. But then I realized something was off. He was too real. He was too intense. And that's when I reacted." "Reacted how?" Laura pressed. Roger's gaze flickered. I fought him. I grabbed the gun. It went off. It was an accident. You have to believe me." Laura didn't believe him. There was something in his eyes, something behind his words. He wasn't being truthful. The story about the gun didn't line up with the evidence. The fake gun they'd planned to use was found in the back room, but a real one was missing from Roger's own private collection. It didn't take long for Laura to realize the horrible truth. Roger hadn't just reacted. He had planned this. That night, as Laura sat at her desk, piecing together the details of the case, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her phone buzzed with a text message, its contents chilling. "You're getting too close, Detective. Stop digging. You don't want to know what happens next." Her stomach tightened. She had uncovered something much darker than she had expected. The pranks, the lies, and now a murder. She had been right to distrust Roger Miller, but now the question was, who else was involved? As the night stretched on, Laura knew one thing for sure. This case was far from over, and the real story was just beginning. The storm rolled in late that night, thick clouds swallowing the moon over Maple Creek. Detective Laura Sanchez sat in her dimly lit office, staring at the case files spread across her desk. The April Fool's Day prank was no longer just a tragic accident. Steve Harrison was dead, Roger Miller was lying through his teeth, and now, Laura had a warning text on her phone from an unknown number. "You're getting too close, Detective. Stop digging. You don't want to know what happens next." She knew one thing for sure. Whoever sent that message wasn't bluffing. By morning, Laura was back at the station, reviewing security footage from Miller's store. She had seen the crime scene photos a dozen times, memorized the eyewitness statements, but something still didn't add up. If Steve was the one pulling the prank, how did a real gun end up in Miller's hand? That's when she noticed it. A brief moment on the footage, barely visible. A shadow moving behind the counter. Someone had been in the store before the prank even started. Laura's blood ran cold. Had Steve really been set up? Later that day, she met with Jenny and Brandon again, this time without Carl. The more she dug into their past, the clearer it became. Steve, Jenny, and Roger had a tangled history that ran deeper than anyone was letting on. Jenny sat with her arms crossed, her eyes glassy from exhaustion. "Detective, we've already told you everything." Brandon, on the other hand, looked worse than before, dark circles under his eyes, his hands shaking. He wasn't talking, but his silence spoke volumes. Laura slid a folder across the table. Inside were old police reports, ones that no one in town had paid much attention to before. Reports of vandalism, petty theft, pranks that Steve had pulled in the past. But one report stood out, a complaint filed 5 years ago by Roger Miller. Jenny's face turned pale. "Where did you get that?" Laura leaned forward. "You told me Steve and Roger had no real beef. that this prank was just for fun. But 5 years ago, Steve broke into Roger's office, trying to dig up dirt on him. And that's not all. This past year, Steve had been spreading rumors about Roger's business, talking about tax fraud, shady deals. That wasn't just a prank, was it? Jenny looked down at her hands. Brandon shifted in his seat. Steve wanted revenge, Laura continued. He was convinced Roger was hiding something. And then, the prank. What if it wasn't just a joke? What if it was Steve's way of forcing Roger's hand, making him panic? Brandon finally spoke, his voice a whisper. Steve wasn't trying to prank Roger. He was trying to expose him. Laura exhaled sharply. The pieces were finally coming together. Steve hadn't been killed because of a prank gone wrong. He had been silenced. That night, Laura drove through the darkened streets of Maple Creek, her mind racing. She had just uncovered a dangerous truth. Roger Miller had motive. But that still didn't explain the biggest mystery. Who switched the gun? Her phone buzzed again. Last warning, detective. Stop. A car appeared in her rearview mirror. Close. Too close. Her instincts screamed danger. Just as she turned the corner, the headlights behind her surged forward, slamming into her bumper. Her car skidded, tires screeching against the wet pavement. Another hit. Laura gritted her teeth, gripping the wheel. Someone wanted her dead, but she wasn't backing down. Not now. This wasn't just a prank anymore. This was a murder. And she was next. Laura's car spun out of control, the tires screeching as she fought to keep it steady. The rain-slicked road offered no mercy. And just as she braced for another hit, the pursuing vehicle swerved away into the darkness. She gasped for breath, hands trembling as she pulled over. The headlights were gone. Whoever had tried to run her off the road didn't want to be caught yet. She grabbed her phone. No service. Of course. A warning. But warnings didn't scare Laura Sanchez. They only made her hungrier for the truth. Back at the station, she pieced together the evidence in silence. The fake robbery, the real gun, Steve's past with Roger Miller. Everything pointed to premeditation. This wasn't an accident. Then there was the shadow from the security footage. Someone had been in Miller's store before Steve walked in. Someone who knew exactly what was going to happen. She needed to talk to Carl. Carl lived on the outskirts of town, in a rundown apartment that smelled of stale beer and regret. When he opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes darted past Laura before settling on her. "You shouldn't be here, detective." "That makes two of us," she said, stepping inside without invitation. "Sit down." Carl obeyed, shoulders hunched, avoiding eye contact. Laura could feel it. He was about to crack. "Tell me the truth," she said softly. "I know Steve's death wasn't an accident. I know someone switched the gun." Carl swallowed hard. "I don't know anything." Laura leaned in. "Then why are you shaking?" Silence. And then, "I didn't know," Carl whispered. His voice was hollow, broken. "I didn't know the gun was real." Laura's pulse quickened. "You switched it." Carl nodded, his hands trembling. "Brandon told me to. He said it was part of the prank. That Steve wanted it to feel real. He gave me the gun. I thought it was fake." Laura's breath caught in her throat. Brandon, the one who had been Steve's best friend, the one who had been silent for too long, the one who had the most to lose if Steve uncovered something he shouldn't have. Carl's eyes were pleading. "I didn't know, detective. I swear." Laura stood abruptly. She had wasted enough time. If Brandon had planned this, then Steve was never meant to walk out of that store alive. Laura found Brandon at the Old Town docks, standing alone under the flickering streetlight. The air was thick with mist, the water below reflecting the stormy sky. He didn't look surprised to see her. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," he said, his voice calm. Too calm. Laura kept her hand near her gun. "You set Steve up." Brandon smirked. Steve set himself up. He was always pushing too far. He was obsessed with proving Roger was dirty. But he never stopped to think. He paused. Some secrets aren't meant to come out. Laura clenched her fists. "And you decided to shut him up?" Brandon sighed, as if he were tired of explaining. "I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted him to stop digging. So I switched the gun, gave it to Carl. Let fate do the rest." And the car tonight? Laura pressed. Brandon chuckled. That wasn't me. Guess you're making a lot of people nervous, Detective. Before Laura could react, Brandon lunged. A knife flashed in the dim light. Laura dodged, grabbing his wrist, twisting. He cried out, the blade clattering to the ground. She slammed him against the railing, breath heavy. It's over. Brandon grinned, even as she cuffed him. Is it? A chill ran down her spine. Because Brandon wasn't afraid. Because the person who had sent the warning, who had run her off the road, was still out there, watching, waiting. And the game wasn't over yet. The interrogation room was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. Brandon sat across from Detective Laura Sanchez, handcuffed, his lips curled into a smirk. He had just confessed to switching the gun, but there was something in his eyes, something that told Laura he wasn't the one pulling the strings. He wasn't afraid, because whoever was really behind this was still out there, watching, waiting. She leaned forward. Who are you covering for? Brandon chuckled, shaking his head. You still don't get it, do you? Laura clenched her jaw. I know you didn't act alone. I know Steve wasn't just messing with Roger. He was after something. And I know that whoever sent me that warning text is still playing their game. Brandon's smirk faded, but he said nothing. Laura exhaled, forcing herself to stay calm. You think you're protecting yourself, but you're just another pawn. And whoever set this up, they don't care what happens to you. You'll be next. Something flickered in Brandon's expression, but he masked it quickly. Then, just as Laura was about to press harder, there was a knock on the door. Officer Daniels stepped in, his face grim. Detective, we have a situation. Laura followed Daniels down the hallway, her gut twisting. The moment they entered the bullpen, she saw it, an envelope, sitting on her desk. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed a man, bound and gagged, tied to a chair in a dark room. His face was bruised and swollen. Roger Miller. Beneath the photo, written in red ink. You got the wrong guy. Laura's stomach dropped. Brandon wasn't the mastermind. And Roger Miller, who she thought had orchestrated Steve's murder, was now a hostage. Someone else was in control, and they wanted her to know it. Time was running out. Laura gathered her team and worked fast. They traced the paper, the ink, the type of film used for the Polaroid. A forensic analyst caught a break. The ink was from a brand only sold at a single stationery store in town. A store owned by Carl's cousin. Carl, the man who had claimed he didn't know what was happening. The man who had been shaking when she questioned him. And the man who, conveniently, had disappeared earlier that evening. Laura and her team stormed an abandoned warehouse near the river. The moment she stepped inside, she knew they were close. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and gasoline. A single light bulb flickered overhead, illuminating the dust that swirled in the air. Then, a muffled groan. Laura's gun was up in an instant. Move in. Her team spread out, sweeping the warehouse. And then she saw him, Roger Miller, tied to a chair, just like in the photo. His face was bloodied, his breath shallow. Clear, someone called. But Laura wasn't convinced. She crouched in front of Roger, untying the gag. Who did this? Roger's eyes flickered open, his lips parted, and then, barely above a whisper, Carl. Laura's heart pounded. Where is he? Roger shook his head weakly. Behind you. The words barely registered before Laura felt the cold press of metal against the back of her head. Carl's voice was steady. Drop your gun. Slowly, carefully. Laura lowered her weapon, but her mind was racing. Carl, the quiet one, the weak one, the one who had claimed he was just a pawn, but it had been him all along. She kept her voice calm. Why? Carl's breath was ragged. Steve didn't know when to stop. He kept digging, kept pushing. And Roger... He scoffed. Roger thought he could control everything, but he was sloppy. I had to clean up his mess. Laura's hands curled into fists. So you framed Roger? You let Brandon take the fall. Carl chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Brandon's an idiot. He played his part well, but he wasn't the one who saw the opportunity. I was. Laura knew she only had seconds to act. Her fingers brushed against her belt, where her backup knife was hidden. Carl didn't notice. He was too busy relishing his moment. "Goodbye, Detective." Laura moved. Fast. She spun, knocking the gun aside, driving her elbow into Carl's ribs. He stumbled back, cursing. She didn't hesitate. She tackled him, pinning him to the ground. Her knee pressed into his chest, her knife at his throat. "It's over." Carl's breath came in short, ragged bursts. "No, it's not." The look in his eyes sent a chill down Laura's spine. Because he wasn't afraid. Because this wasn't just about Steve, or Roger, or some prank gone wrong. Because Carl had been planning this for a long time. And because, somewhere out there was still one more piece of the puzzle missing. 2:17 a.m. The earthquake struck without warning. A 7.3 magnitude shockwave that shattered windows, split highways, and turned skyscrapers into tombs. By sunrise, Portland was barely breathing. Sirens howled to the wreckage. Emergency crews dug for survivors, and chaos reigned. But at the ruins of Summit Heights apartments, rescuers found something no one expected. Buried beneath the collapsed parking garage was a black SUV, crushed under a fallen concrete beam. Inside the driver's seat sat a corpse, but this wasn't a victim of the earthquake. This body had been here for years. Detective Eli Parker had seen plenty of death in his 15 years on the force, but this was different. Murder doesn't get buried forever. Not really. Fire Chief Ramos met him at the scene, her face drawn with exhaustion. 2 confirmed dead from the quake, 5 still missing, and 1 we weren't looking for. She gestured to the SUV. Parker crouched beside the broken window. The body was mummified, skin stretched over bone. The hands were zip-tied to the steering wheel. Whoever this was, they hadn't died in a car accident. They'd been left here to rot, but the earthquake had exposed them. Someone's secret was about to come out. Parker pulled his flashlight and scanned the car's interior. Dust covered everything, untouched for years. But then, something caught his eye. A faded parking pass on the dashboard. October 2021. 3 years ago. Somebody wanted this body hidden, Parker muttered, and they almost got away with it. Then he saw something else. A phone, wedged between the seat and the center console. Its screen was cracked, but intact. Parker carefully pulled it out. The moment he pressed the power button, the screen flickered to life. A single notification popped up. A new text message, sent this morning, from an unknown number. "They found him. We need to talk." Parker's blood ran cold. The earthquake didn't just expose a body. It triggered something bigger. Someone out there was still watching, still worried. And if they thought their secret was safe, they were dead wrong. Who do you think sent the message? Was it the killer? An accomplice? Or someone who knows too much? Drop your theories in the comments below. And if you love a good mystery, share this video, because this case is just getting started. Like, comment, and subscribe for more real-life crime stories.